Good evening, and welcome to this special forum on the impact of violence and inequity on families of color. We're delighted that each and every one of you joined us on tonight, and I'm especially grateful for Channelet and Oakdale Covenant Church coming together for this particular forum. At this time, I'm going to ask, before we get into the meat of our program, that Reverend Justin Kane, the youth pastor of Oakdale Covenant Church, come and open us with a word of prayer.
Let's pray. Lord, tonight we've come to learn more about you through your justice in our world. So now, God, we pray the prayer of Amos that you would allow justice to roll down like a mighty stream and righteousness like an ever-flowing river. Even now, oh God, we want our conversation to be blessed as a result of you being in the midst of it. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Kane. I am delighted today to have this esteemed panel that is joining us for this very, very important conversation. I would not be able to do them justice by introducing them. So I'm going to ask that each and every one of them introduce themselves in their own right. And so we're going to start with the pastor of Oakdale Covenant Church, Reverend Dr. D. Dale Griffin, and then we'll proceed with Melanie and in that order. Pastor Griffin.
I'm Pastor Daryl Griffin. I have been pastor of Oakdale Covenant Church for the last 21 years, and I'm grateful to be here tonight to talk about this serious topic.
I am Melanie Hall. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm elated to be here. I have a group practice in Homewood, Illinois. I have a staff of 5, and we deal with adults and couples as well. I am trained in anger management as well as EMDR, and I'm looking forward to our discussion here.
Hello, I'm Terrence Smith. I currently serve as the Minister of Music here at Oakdale Covenant Church and Director of Arts for the church and the Oakdale Christian Academy and Child Care Center.
My name is Ted Williams. I'm the chairman of the Social Sciences Department at Kennedy King College, and I am also an arts entrepreneur and work in the performing arts space in the city as well.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Marisha Humphreys. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And my area of research and clinical practice is with children and families around social and emotional development.
Thank you again to each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us for this forum, to engage in this extremely important dialogue. We have seen in the news just countless levels of violence that is taking place all across the country. It's not necessarily in one city. Violence is taking place in ballparks and streets and places of business, literally all over our society. And so, Melanie, we're going to start with you because the reality of the situation is we know that the issue of violence does not start at the point that a person pulls the trigger. And you specifically in your practice deal with high conflict couples. And when we talked in preparation for this, I was just kind of amazed at some of the work that you're doing and really helping families to understand that the conflict in the marriage and the home does have a direct correlation with that particular child. So can you tell us a little bit about that in terms of the conflict that you're seeing or the impact that high conflict couples have on their respective children?
Sure. The greatest impact boils down to communication, and it boils over into everything else. Their education, their ability to socialize well, their ability to maintain relationships, go into the workforce. If you are not able to identify to see parents learn how to deal with conflict, learn how to deal with finances, learning how to deal with paying bills, learning how to deal with, purchasing things, learning how to deal with, the other person in the family that may have some trauma. how to rally around that person, how to be emotionally supportive around other family members. If a child is not able to witness these things, then they are likely going to grow up absent with these things and formulate relationships with other people and not have these types of tools as they go into relationships, right? Um, and so some of the things that I have found in my practice are there are people that have been traumatized that have gotten together and bonded over their own trauma. And they identify with one another because we've both been hurt. So we should be able to understand one another. But what they end up doing is breeding codependency. They end up breeding generational trauma, right? Because they pass down some of these poor communication skills that they have to their children. They don't know how to resolve any conflicts. They don't have tools for these things. And some of the things that I work with some of my clients is things like stonewalling, shutting down, the aggression, the yelling, the name calling, even the physical violence, right? People see the bruises, but it's the verbal, it's the emotional. And there's so much mental illness that just isn't dealt with. And I think people focus on the word illness, and I try to focus on the mental health, the biopsychosocial person, the whole person. But when they come to see me, they're wondering, do I have a mental illness? And I said, well, let's not focus on illness, just let's focus on wellness. Because whatever there is that you are struggling with, it doesn't mean that you are ill. It just means these parts of you have not been dealt with, right? So when I work with people with anger management, there's either people that are denying that they're angry. They'll say, I don't get angry. Or there's someone that says, I have a right to be angry. Yes, but you have to channel it the correct way, right? You have to understand that it's okay to be angry and you can use that positively or you can use it negatively. I try to teach people how to use anger to propel them toward the things that they want to get done rather than taking out on everyone else. No one knows your triggers but you, right? And so they go into relationships saying, well, this is what happened to me when you did this, when you said that, right? But the other person doesn't know that you have these issues going on and they wouldn't know if there's no communication.
So let me ask a follow-up question to that, because when we talk, there are times when the conflict in the home escalates to the point that you recommend that the children go somewhere else
Yes.
for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of the situation is, because of all of the different dynamics that are impacting families for various reasons,
Mm-hmm.
there is an enormous amount of conflict.
Yeah.
So, at what point do you think it is best for children to go somewhere else until that conflict subsides?
And that's like a last resort, right? Because we want to try and keep the family intact. However, when there is physical violence and it's uh, often, right? The frequency is very high. When there is the verbal abuse is so high that the child is like repeating everything that they see in the home, it might be time to discuss, where else can this child go? Because they are now, it's not just about neglect, but they are not being reared, right? They are not being emotionally cared for. Their emotional health is now at stake, right? It doesn't mean that this child can't ever come back home, but we have to treat the whole family. We have to treat the couple, we have to treat them individually. And then as a couple, they need family therapy as well because the children may now be taking the place that an adult would normally take, right? The child is now trying to say, no, don't do this. And we need help by doing this. The child should not be in that position.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that, Melanie. Dr. Humphreys, I think this is a good segue to you, because one of the things that we're finding is that when children are socialized in this way, I personally don't believe that children are born criminals. I don't believe that youth are born. I don't believe any of us are born a certain way in that way. But when a child is socialized in that way, can you talk about a little bit about, from your vantage point, from both a research as well as a practitioner, how the failure to process these negative emotions and frustrations, right? If they're not given the coping mechanisms to to handle these frustrations because they're developing feelings, right? Each time they see their mother or their father treated in a way that they don't want them to be treated, or they see something else that bothers them in some kind of way, whether they verbalize it or not, there is an emotion or frustration that is developing. And can you talk a little bit about what happens when that child is not able to develop those processing skills?
Sure. And kind of just to piggyback, caregivers are models, they're role models for children. And so children pick up on what they see. And so I always, we always were taught when we were younger, adults would say, do as I say, but not as I do. That's a fallacy. Kids are going to do as you do, not as you say. So if you want them to engage with you and talk to their friends in a positive way, then you have to do the same with them and with your partner and with other adults. So, one of the things is children are developing social and emotional competence skills. And basically all that is knowledge and understanding about emotions. How do I use that information to guide my social interaction? So if I'm feeling a certain way, what do I do to manage that feeling? If I see something happen to another person, what do I think they're feeling? And then how should I respond based on what they're feeling? So there's perspective taking, there's empathy, there's all these different things. And they are picking that up on how they see adults interact with them. And so when an adult tells a child who's crying, stop crying, you have nothing to cry about, you are invalidating their emotions. And so now they're wondering, well, maybe I don't have that emotion because my mom, my dad, my grandmother, my uncle just told me that, right? And so now they're growing up in a way that they don't even trust how they feel. And emotions come on board. We say the four basic emotions by 6 months: happy, sad, angry, afraid. They're there, right? And then it's over time, especially during the preschool period, that they get more knowledge about emotions. We want to give them more vocabulary. So when they don't know how to regulate, right, their emotions, then they develop really bad coping strategies. Because the coping strategy is going to be there. It's a matter of whether it's positive or negative. Positive strategy, maybe when I get upset, I may go sit down. I may decide to go outside and play basketball, throw the ball around for a little while. I may decide to go write some poetry, write some rap lyrics. A negative way can be I'm going to punch the wall. I'm going to punch my sister. I'm going to punch my mom. I'm going to go out and get involved with, this group of people, rob a store, because I have these feelings. And so when you don't develop age appropriate regulation skills, then it goes somewhere. And I think the other thing you asked about was behavior. Oftentimes, children, even teenagers, if they haven't been socialized with the right emotion language, so giving our kids the words beyond happy, sad, angry, and afraid, right? Saying things like, this just happened. Are you frustrated? You seem like you might be frustrated. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't know that word, but now I know, right? When they don't have the language, their behavior. I always tell parents, you watch your child's behavior. That is telling, your behavior is telling you something. Every child, every teenager, every adult has every right to be angry. The point is, how do you express that anger? I can be angry, but I can't come into this classroom and turn everything over, right? And so it's helping if when kids don't develop these skills to be able to name emotions, be able to develop skills to handle them that works best for them, and to have adults who support that development, who acknowledge it, then they're going to develop very negative ways of coping that then have a ripple effect, not just within their family, but within their peer group and within the institutions they interact.
Yeah, Dr. Humphries, I'm going to be honest. You said something that I did not know and really scared me. If I heard you right, you're saying that by the age of 6 months, there's four emotions. What were those four? Happy, sad,
angry,
angry,
and afraid.
and afraid. So if I'm a parent and I know I didn't give my child what they needed by 6 months, and they're 10 years old now, or 12 years old now, or 8 years old now, what do I do if I didn't give them what they needed by 6 months?
You start now, right?
What can I
you
do?
start so you have to first, before you can even start there, you have to do some self-reflection. And so even thinking about Melanie saying like, why haven't I talked to my kids about emotions? Why have I always said, be quiet, don't say that, don't cry, don't do this, suck it up, be a man, all these different things? Why am I saying those things? So you have to figure out, what is it that's bothering you? Because you can't support your child in this if you can't first identify what's the hang up for you. And for you, it may be because someone said that to you, and that's all you know. And that's what you think it means to be a grown up, right? What it means to be a man, to be a woman. And so then you have to make the conscious decision to now say, I'm going to support my kid by allowing them to express emotion, which might make me feel uncomfortable. And so I say this to my students, but you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable if you're going to move. If you're going to make a change, making change is not easy. It's not comfortable, right? And so we fall back when we get uncomfortable. We go back to our old ways because it's a bad habit. But we have to, as the adult, if you can recognize, because that's good self-reflection. I didn't give my kid this, but now I want to, so I have to work on me. Come see Melanie, right? And then I have to help my kid. Come see me, right? So to be able to support them and allow them to express themselves, and so that's really the important piece.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Humphreys. Melanie, you want to get in?
Wanted to just kind of piggyback on what she said in terms of, you know, the four things, because I talk to my clients about that a lot as well, the adults, because I'm like, at some point you had to start to learn another vocabulary to express yourself. And I talk a lot about their emotional intelligence. And would you agree, Dr. Humphreys, that when a child experiences trauma at whatever age, that some of their emotional growth stunts right there. And as they grow, you know, things continuously happen. I'm steadily getting stunted, right? And then if I become this 30-year-old, but my emotional age may really only be 20, I'm going to respond to you like a 20-year-old, not a 35-year-old. You get what I'm saying? And so that's why when we keep seeing children exposed to certain dangers in society and at home, it becomes chronic. And it's like, this child may be 17, but they may be 10 emotionally. So they're not knowing what to do with these emotions.
Yeah, we're going to come back. We're going to come back to that point. Uh, Minister Terrence, you know, you've heard the discussion that we've had as it relates to um, just the level of conflict and trauma that our families are in, right? It's stressful. Um, it creates high blood pressure, all kind of other different physical situations. It affects self-esteem and self-confidence. And you know, all of us know people who are looking for some outlet, looking for some expression. How do I cope with the pain? How do I cope with the negative emotions or feelings that I have? And sometimes, you know, all of us, some of us have, you know, have done Versand. We've processed them in ways that were not productive. We've sought outlets that, you know, really did not help the situation, but made the situation worse. Can you talk about how music and the arts can be a form of positive expression in the midst of high conflict situations for both children and youth as well as adults?
Well, it's really no secret that music has the opportunity, or music has the, I guess, without our permission, touches our emotions, and it crosses so many boundaries, so many parameters. And so even yet and still, like when we're happy, we go to our happy playlist. When we're sad, you know, we can listen to one song and it can bring up a memory, whatever the case may be. But music is a vehicle, but that's not, I would say, the complete puzzle. So music is one resource in the arts that will also allow people to have a creative and positive outlet and expression, be it singing, writing lyrics. People can rap, people can dance. Music and arts don't just have to be done with the physicalities of your body. You can paint. If you want to take a walk and hum, sing with the birds are singing a song that's not written, you know, all of those things. And we have the opportunity, just as music can touch our individual emotions without our permission, we can also use that power to put that energy into a place of creative expression, put that into a place of a positive change, problem solving, game planning, community singing is an opportunity. If you want to build, what I like to do is build intentional community with music. But sometimes you'll have people who cannot sing. You'll have people who like to be a part of something, but they don't necessarily possess that skill that's on display at the time. But when we get to a point where we're building intentional community, it's not that I get lost in the crowd. It's that I'm a part of a crowd, or I'm a part of something bigger than me, or I'm a part of something that makes me feel good that I don't have to feel bad about, or I'm a part of something that helps me express those unspoken words or unspoken emotions that I have. And what I've seen is, even in rehearsals or different programs with children, their parents will sneak in after a while and try to sit in the back, or they will sneak in and say, "Hey, what's going on? I heard them talking about this." And just to get back to what you said about um, being stunted emotionally and internally. Sometimes when you deal with the children at a small age, you're still dealing with those parents who have grown up physically, but they still have those same emotions and they're looking for that same outlet as well. And so sometimes that intentional community helps us to develop the child, but also develop the child inside of the parents as well. And to create an opportunity for us to be better together. You know, I was going to put that in there. But yeah,
No, that's good, TJ. That's good, TJ. I want to ask a follow up question because I like the intentional community, right? You've been the master at creating that. And we didn't necessarily tee it up this way, but we have a school, an academy. You've had countless, hundreds of young people who've actually come through the children's choir. Now you're the minister of music here on the church side. Can you talk a little bit about the release that you see from both parents as well as young people in just the rehearsal, right? In terms of how that community really does make a difference, the bonding that takes place, the relationships that are formed. And there's sometimes, I've seen, and you all are just in here and you just going on and going on. The kids don't want to go home. The parents are sitting in the back, as they're watching all of these different things. Can you just talk a little bit about that and just how it does uplift, maybe one or two experiences that come to your mind off the top of your head?
okay, one experience. We were preparing one summer for a concert, and because it's 100 kids in the choir stand, I do closed rehearsals when it's crunch time. So I tell the parents we rehearse from this time to this time, and after that we're gonna open all those doors. You can come back and get your children. And they're like, "Well, can we sit in for a few minutes?" And so they sat in, a couple of rehearsals, but just to see how they were moved as the children were moved, and so many times we think as adults or even as parents, not necessarily I'm a parent, but anyway, even as parents, we think that we're always to be the teachers. But it was so rewarding and so uplifting and encouraging to see those parents and those adults in the room be poured into from children who are just singing their hearts out from a place of really believing what they're saying, a place of really understanding that I feel good about something and I'm going to share this with someone else. And then in turn, the parents, it creates a healthy dynamic. It creates a relationship for development. They in the car ride home singing the songs. Now they get home and where it would be family trauma or an argument. Now tonight we got a little bit of peace. We got a little bit of time. I brought you to the choir or I brought you to these events because I wanted you to have something to do. And in turn, I also received something as well. It's that intentional community. It's about creating those experiences where we can all play a part, but nobody has to do too much of anything so that the burden is shared as well as the reward.
No, that's good. That's good. And this just came to me. If this is going to be a problem, I'm really doing an audible right now. Because this, just to use Pastor Griffin's term, this was just dropped in my spirit as I'm sitting here. Uh, let's close out with that single that the church did for this particular broadcast. But Pastor, I think this is a good segue to talk about the role community-based organizations and faith-based institutions can play in addressing the violence that our communities are confronted with. I think oftentimes, some churches, and we're grateful that Oakdale is not one of those churches, put their proverbial heads in the sand and say, as long as it's happening out there, it doesn't necessarily impact me. And so, can you talk about the need for churches and faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, to really extend beyond the walls and the responsibility or the role that they can play in addressing some of these issues and their impact on families of color?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the things is that Jesus spent 99% of the ministry outside of the church, and we spend 99% of our ministry inside of the church, and probably 1% out. Uh, I do believe that our faith can solve a lot of problems, but I do believe that faith without works is dead. So it's important that churches and faith communities partner with community based organizations. Just as God has given me a gift to preach, He has given these two psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists, given them the tools. These are gifts Dr. Humphreys has and Dr. Melanie has. These are gifts that they have that God has given. And it would be a shame if the church did not recognize those gifts. There are a lot of things that we know how to do, but there's a lot of things that we need to learn, and partnership helps us learn. I have very little uh, insight on how the mind sort of works and mental illness, but there are people who study this every day. And I believe the more you know, the more you grow. And so having partnerships like that helps us do things that we can help us to reach people even further and reach people that we wouldn't have had an opportunity to reach. So I think it's important that the church and the faith communities work together with our communities. It is as, and I think the church needs to play even a greater role because people do listen to clergy. They do listen to what happens in our church. So one of the things that I try to do at Oakdale is remind them that I have a therapist, that I have a spiritual director, and take away some of the stigma in that. The second thing is to remind the congregation that the violence impacts all of us. These are our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, our brothers and our sisters who are impacted by this. So whenever there is for example, I just was on the phone with you today and there was a shooting of one of our members' grandchild. And that just doesn't affect that particular family, it affects all of us. And so the church has to play a role in helping to stem and bring peace to our families as well as to our communities.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that because one of the things that I think is often overlooked, a low hanging fruit, as they say, that is often overlooked, is the role the church can play to minister to families in conflict. Um, you know, you're right. We were on the phone. One of the members' relatives had been shot. It's only by the grace of God that the situation was not worse. And the role the church can play in ministering to families during these particular difficult moments. Some families don't have that story where their loved one may not have survived. And I think you told me earlier today as well that there was a funeral that was recently done. I don't remember if it was yesterday or sometime. It was today, where a person just walking down the street, hit by a stray bullet, killed them. Married for 3 years. I think the spouse was expecting a child. And the role the church can play in ministering to families during those moments. So, can you talk a little bit about how it's not just putting together the programmatic side, and we're going to get more into that, but also just the basic lending a praying hand or a loving hand or a compassionate hand to families during these moments. Can you talk about really how important that is, particularly during these times?
Well, the church has always been a therapeutic community. And so, people know that prayer and uh, sort of forming community and helping people understand that they are not alone. Part of my responsibility as a pastor is to show up sometimes, just minister by my presence. There's a lot of times that I'll go to homes, even today, and I'm not saying a lot as much as I'm there, letting them know that they're not in this by themselves, letting them know that a whole church family is there. One of the things that's interesting within this pandemic is the prayer ministry and the sick ministry, those are sick and shut in, they send out cards. And I think about one of the members, Sister Gloria McKay, who's in Texas. She had to move and relocate. She's unable to walk now. And she said, she had to call me up last week and say, I have been down and depressed because of my condition. But I just want to tell you, Pastor, that the church has shown me so much love. My wall in my room is just filled with cards from Oakdale. And she says that every time I feel like I'm not going to be able to make it, I look on the wall and I see those cards, and it means so much to me. And then to hear my name called on Sunday, it lets me know that me being this 94-year-old woman, that my church has not forgotten about me. And that means a lot. So it's not sometimes these big things, it's sometimes the little things. But I'll take it a step further, is not only do we need to be doing that and connecting and building community and formulating community and doing pastoral care, we also need to be honest as pastors and know where our limitations are. To know that at some point, I have prayed and prayed and prayed, but at some point you really need to see a therapist. Your family needs to have therapy. There's something wrong. There's something going on that needs some attention. And so I think that we can do all the praying, and I believe in that. But at some point we have to know when we've done our best and our best is not good enough, that we do need to seek some additional help.
No, thank you. Thank you so very much for that, Pastor. As I was sitting here thinking, and, when you said what you just said, we know that the Bible says that faith without works is dead. And while we live in a world, we know that everyone does not necessarily always have the same values, the same belief systems, etc. And so we are really dependent upon public policy and public institutions to really kind of help and assist and alleviate some of these particular pressures. And so, Ted, I'm going to kind of switch and pivot to you, because I do believe that there is a role that public policy can play in helping to save our families. I don't want to get into some of the more politicized issues today because we really don't have time. But there's been a lot of research and studies that have been done talking about how various policies have taken one parent out of the home, and certain policies were structured in certain ways to create persistent poverty. And so we're now trying to begin to tackle some of those policy initiatives. And I'm personally of the opinion that it's not necessarily a Democratic or Republican piece, but as much as it is, what do we need to do to save our families? Saving our families is not a political issue. It should not be a political issue. And so, from your vantage point, from your perch, what are some of the policies that you've seen that, from your vantage point, has been detrimental to families of color? And what are some responses that we can have as community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, as well as what are some of those policies that have been beneficial? There's been a lot of talk recently about the recent initiative by President Biden, and what President Biden is doing for families at the federal level. So, Ted, can you kind of unpack a little bit of that for us tonight?
Sure. Thank you all so much for having me. It is always an honor and not just an honor, but a pleasure to be here with my Oakdale family. And I always look for any excuse I can to get over here. So I'm grateful to be here. Public policy matters. If you think about this, a lot of people try to talk about this false dichotomy between the idea of church and state. In our communities, we've really never had that privilege, that luxury. We've never been able to separate our faith, which has sustained us, and public policy, which threatens our lives every day and or provides us with some level of benefit. And so when you look at what is going on in public policy, every public policy decision that is made in this country has an impact. At one point, for instance, you can look at things like, say, smoking, which was advertised and promoted in the country for many years. When the government stopped the ability for companies to do that, the numbers of people who were smoking went down. When you look at no-fault divorce policies in the 1970s, you can see that the divorce rate went through the roof immediately as a result of public policy. So it does matter. When you talked about gun violence a little earlier, there are nations around the world that do not face the gun violence that we face in this country. That is very obvious and it is very clear. If you look at, and I don't have to go through the list, well, I will partially, but you can go to some of the Nordic countries, you can go to Canada, you can go to Australia, who at one point had a big mass shooting in the mid 90s. They banned a number of weapons in their communities, and immediately those shootings ended. Now, I'm not suggesting, once again, I know that I have to walk a fine line in terms of talking about public policy because so many things are so contentious, but I am a firm believer that what we put in, we get out, we receive some outcome from it. So what you have right now is a situation in which this country is facing the kind of devastation that we have really never seen. The only thing that we have been close to seeing in this way, in this space, in the last 100 years has been the Great Depression. And after the Great Depression, you saw FDR moved swiftly and quickly to create things like unemployment compensation and Social Security and other programs like that, public works programs and public jobs programs. When you look at that, we are in a situation where without that kind of large scale national investment, we're not going to move ourselves out of it. So our current administration right now is looking at a $6 trillion budget. They're looking at $2 trillion in infrastructure. They're looking at, and they've done already, they've given out money and checks, stimulus checks to 130 million households in this country already to sustain people through the worst economic situation since the Great Depression. We know that they expanded the child tax credit, where now families received either $250 per child or $300 per child based on the age of the children. I heard people criticizing that. I heard people saying that if you give people money, then they are not going to work. And I think we have to be sophisticated in the way that we look at these, because we're talking about literally for 6 months was a promise, 6 months. We're talking about $250 per child for 6 months. Now, this is not a math class or anything like that. But if you do the math for the average family, 2 kids, you're looking at 250 times 2, which is $500. You mean to tell me that if you have 2 children in this economy, that giving you $500 a month for 6 months is going to make you lazy and dependent on the government? Think about how silly that sounds. Our families are suffering, right? We are in a situation, and I would suggest, as we said, the violence anywhere you go in the world, violence is correlated to issues of inequality. You can go to every part of the world that you go to. You can go to Colombia. You can go to the Middle East. You can go anywhere you want to go. You're going to see in areas that are disconnected and disadvantaged and disillusioned, those areas will have crime and violence. And so when we look at cities like Chicago and other parts of this country, it is so simple, if we are willing to do the work, to think about the why. Why are these kids picking up guns? Why do they have easy access to guns? Why are there communities in cities like Chicago that have not received investment for decades? And when we get to that, then we can start to, I believe, impact some of the challenge that we're facing. And I do believe that the current administration now, where we are they're willing to make those kinds of investments. But the truth is, and I'll say this in closing, is that while I am extremely encouraged, we are living in communities that are so devastated that even $6 trillion and $2 trillion and these things one time are still not going to get us out of these holes. And so we need Marshall Plan, rebuilt Europe after World War II. We need that level of investment long term to begin to see the tide turn in our communities.
Let me ask a follow up twist to that question. And I want to push the envelope a little bit here, Ted. So I'm hoping you can flow with me. Whether we realize it or not, there's a subset of people that benefit from violence and poverty. I don't think we would see it at the level that we see it if there wasn't a group of people that was benefiting from it. And this is a conversation that we oftentimes don't like to have. So can you talk a little bit about, we both have seen things at the national level, the state and local level, how in some instances what we see is continuing to be allowed because of the economic benefit it creates for a group of people.
So you went there, Kevin. You went there, brother. The United States, as we know, we have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the people in prison in this country, right? We have twice as many people in jail as the Chinese do, and there are 1 billion people in China. You can go to jail in China for having a church service at your house. And so in the land of the free, now there are two, I don't want to even say competing, actually, they work hand in hand. There are two principles that have run through this country that motivate everything: capitalism and racism. And when they work together, they create situations in which certain people are at the top and certain are at the bottom. And we create a caste system, the likes of which, India did not do as well as we did. We have a profit-driven prison system in this country. We have a system of mass incarceration in this country in which people are living and profiting, as you said, off of the incarceration of other people. In the U.S. Constitution, slavery is still legal. We don't talk about that enough. We bypass it. We look at it and we go, oh my goodness, why are there so many of us, people that look like us, in jail? This is constitutionally set up from 150 years ago so that we could have free and cheap labor. Now, one thing I will say about the current administration is that they ended contracts for private prisons. They will not renew any of those. That is moving in the right direction. And so when you have prisons that make billions of dollars a year, there's a profit motive for putting people in jail. Think about how that sounds. And then you couple that with the fact that the United States makes more weapons than any place in the world, and we sell them all over the world, that the weapon industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, that a new gun rolls off the assembly line every 3 minutes in this country, a new weapon. How on earth are we going to get out of this unless we address those big questions? Yes, I am a believer. Yes, I am a minister. Yes, I believe in prayer. Yes, I recognize that at the end of the day that we need God more than we need anything. But I also understand that public policy matters. And we have to be sophisticated enough to understand what they are doing at higher levels than us and how that impacts our behavior, how it impacts our decisions, and how it impacts our communities and the future of those communities. And that, my friend, I believe if we tackle that, particularly around this question of profiteering off of our death, I believe we can start to move in the right direction on some of these issues.
Thank you so very much for that, Ted. It's a great segue as we move into this particular phase of our discussion, which is really honing in on the impact of economic inequity on families. Oftentimes, when individuals are most stressed is when there is enormous level of financial difficulty or financial burden that they can't necessarily figure out how they're going to take care of. And one of the things that I don't think that we do a good enough job at is helping individuals mentally cope when we encounter these economic difficulties. Pastor Griffin alluded to it a little bit earlier in terms of removing the stigma associated with therapy and counseling. And so, Melanie, if you could, what what are some of the strategies, tips, ideas that you would offer um, for individuals who are dealing with economic stress in their relationship? We just went through the pandemic, and there was great job loss, and one person is working, the other person is no longer working, and the stress that revealed. We just dealt with the realities of inflation. And if you're good enough if you've been able to keep your job, your dollar doesn't go as far as it did 2 years ago. And can you talk a little bit about um, the role counseling can play in helping individuals, I'm talking about adults now, process that so that that stress is not passed on to their children?
Yes. One, there's many things that we talk about. Encouragement, of course. Just sitting with a therapist sometimes, having someone that don't know you, don't know your situation, don't know um, where most people judge you. There's power in that. There's power in just sometimes sitting in silence and allowing a person to cry. There's a lot of times that people will come and they have their list of don't haves. They have their list of things that I have to do and how am I supposed to do this and how am I supposed to do that. And I have to tell them just pause. There's the anxiety is a lot of focusing on what if this, what if that, what about this and what about that. It's focusing on the future, too far into it. We got to stay right here and today. And a lot of times the depression is coming from replaying the past and thinking about there was a time and I remember I used to have this and what about that, and so and so did this to me and I wouldn't be in this place if that hadn't happened. And you can't stay back there. We're not there anymore. You have to learn to stay in the present, and in that present, what I encourage them to do. I'm not a faith-based practice, but I bring a lot of faith into it because that's what has helped me. So a lot of times I am reminding my clients of their faith. And that's when you kind of get that look of, oh, yeah, I forgot about that, right? And I remind them, you haven't been to church. And that was one thing that was part of your support system. Have you tried going back there, relying on the resources in the community? A lot of people are too proud to ask because at one point in time, they were the ones helping other people. And so now I need the help and I don't know how to ask for help. Or I don't have an extended family that is willing to help because of whatever dysfunction we have in my family. So you find people having to move in with other people, and I encourage them to come up with the things that they have to do a benefit cost analysis on everything. How is this going to benefit me? What may this cost me? Because if it's not going to benefit me, then I don't need to go down that road. I encourage a lot of my couples to work together, and working together means just like a business will sit and have meetings, you all need to sit at the table every Sunday and go over your money. What are we tackling this week? What are we going to tackle this month? And you stay on track. You hold each other accountable. And even to some degree, communicating with the children, here's what we're working on. Because guess what? They see the frustration. They see the cabinets are not as full as they used to be. They see that there's not as many grocery bags coming in as it used to be. We see that we're going to grandma's to eat, but we're not eating here at home. What's going on? And you have to talk in children's terms where they understand right now we're going through a little bit of a struggle, but we're all in it together. There's a lot of comfort for children in knowing that we're all going to do it together. It's when children start to see one parent upstairs, one parent downstairs. No one is focusing on us, so we're just here trying to wing it and figure it out for ourselves. That's when you start to see things crumble because They rely on the parents. They're taking their cues from you. Are we supposed to be okay? Well, they said we're okay, but they're not even talking right now. So it's okay to sit down and talk with your children and say, you know what, it's hard for everybody right now, but we're going to get through this. And you try to encourage your clients to do the same thing. I try to encourage my couples to do the same thing. Yes, it's hard, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, thank you for that, Melanie. Dr. Humphreys, when I was growing up, um, we just didn't know we was poor. I was in that category. I'm old enough to remember Payless shoe source, and that's where we got our shoes because it was $19.99 for a pair of Pro Rings. My dad would nowhere in the world pay the cost of gym shoes today, and so the any levels of stigma related to poverty or classism we were blinded from because everybody in my crew was kind of basically in the same space. But we're living in a point in time now where the inequities that exist amongst adults, and I'm not talking about just inequity from the perspective of racial inequity. There are some affluent African Americans, families of color, who have made it, quote unquote, to use the proverbial term, and they are now interacting with individuals who would be classified, quote unquote, as low income. And so now children are being exposed to that inequity, that imbalance at a much earlier age to the point to where some individuals won't even be their friends. And that kind of lingering effect. So can you talk a little bit about, like I said, we focus on the racism and how racism impacts the maturation of children as they move to adulthood. But can you give us a little bit of insight in terms of the impact of classism and economic challenges?
Sure. So when you think about inequities, it's the biggest piece for children is not necessarily within the construct, the classism and the construct of their homes or even their neighborhoods. And I think also, sorry, the teacher me, just understand what classism is. So that's like stereotypes about a group of people who are a lower socioeconomic standpoint. So what we actually see it is in the context of where kids interact. So that bigger space is school. And so, where you see a lot of the negative impact of classism in schools is that there's a body of research that shows that children from low income backgrounds that attend quote unquote low income schools, there's less resources in the schools. But beyond that, that we know is that their teachers engage with them less. They have lower expectations of them, and the learning and the education in which they receive is beneath what it should be. And so that inequity is really in that space. And so you have young people coming to school 9.5 months out of the year, interacting with teachers and administrators who are like, they're from this background and this neighborhood. We don't expect much, so we don't have to do much. Right. And so, whereas we're teaching algebra to these eighth graders, but and kids leave school thinking, I finished algebra, so I'm going to go to ninth grade and I'm going to take geometry. And then they learn when they get to their high school that you didn't get the whole year of algebra because you didn't pass the algebra exit exam. It's not because you're not a good test taker. Your school only covered half the year, but they made you think you got the whole year. And so now that inequity is in your face. So guess what? Now your ninth grader can't take geometry. Your ninth grader is really interested in science, right? They wanted to take science. They want to go to college and they want to major in biology or chemistry or eventually go to med school. Well, that requires you to take geometry, pre-algebra, I mean not pre-algebra, algebra 2, trig, and then your senior year calculus. If you have to take algebra again ninth grade year, guess what you're not taking your senior year? You're not taking calculus. So guess what you're likely not going to get accepted into a major for? Biology, chemistry, right? And so that inequity is coming, that classism is actually the biggest space is school. Yes, we do see the ways in which families also interact with other families. And so you talked about, Black and brown families that are middle class or upper class who are more affluent, and the ways in which they talk down to, look down upon individuals from low income status, making I often see lots of comments about the ways in which, quote unquote, they parent those children, right? And I always say, if you heard, sorry, a white person say exactly what just came out of your mouth, you'd be ready to go to blows, right? And that's a space of classism. And I think, Melanie alluded to this. When you have limited resources, and I think you also alluded to it, you have to do this improvisational economic dance. And there's decisions that families make that they don't want to make, but they have to make. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they left their kids home alone like that. Those babies are only 7 and 8. Most caregivers, most parents, they don't want to leave their kids at home alone, but they make $11 an hour and they don't have enough money to pay for the after school program or a babysitter. So they've kind of come up with something where Miss Jones down the street will look out for them when they walk home and will text mom and say, hey, they made it in the house at least, right? And so we have to be really careful about how we think about and perceive those that are from different socioeconomic status and decisions they make. Lots of people would love to put their kid in la creme de la creme childcare, but everybody don't have $535 a week per child to do that. And so what are decisions we have to make? And so that's where public policy comes, right? We think about other countries. Other countries, childcare is free. There is free childcare in Scandinavian countries until they're 6. There is free maternity. Mothers and fathers can have a year of paid maternity leave, paternity leave. And then school starts and it's free and it's high educational experience. And we don't have that. And so public policies, right, really could, in other ways, when we think about education, what does education look like? We spent, quote unquote, years revamping education to honestly get absolutely nowhere.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you so very much for that, Dr. Humphreys. And you led us right into our next question because Pastor Griffin, I don't want to tell your background, but I think you were born in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I've had the pleasure of being where in your neighborhood, your birthplace, and you know we can attest to how much of a struggle it was to just overcome the inequities without the anger, without the rage. I forget the name of the book. Ted or Pastor Griffin, one of you may remember. I think it's Makes Me Want to Holler, Throw Up My Hands, in terms of just the constant onslaught that you have to be reminded that you're black and you're male, or the pressures of being a woman in today's society. I mean, it's just tough. And so, can you kind of reflect on a instance of inequity or violence that you experienced that shook you a bit, and what steps did you take to overcome that? It can be something that you experienced personally or something that impacted your family. So you can come from a individual perspective or a family perspective, but how did you overcome? Because sometimes people see this platform and they don't realize that we're overcoming daily, right? There's things and there's situations and there's circumstances that we're battling with, even as we're sitting here right now. So it's not as if we've arrived or we got it together, but we're listening, taking tips and saying, oh, I need to do this tomorrow. I need to do that next week. So it's not as if this is a process that we stop or we cease, trying to get better. So what are some of the things that, or an experience that you don't mind sharing that you've had to overcome?
I remember one year, I think we had a string of deaths from November all the way to April. Reverend Sutton was here. And it was the year that Deacon Pedway died, Christmas Eve. I was in Philadelphia for Christmas. And I remember getting the call, and Reverend Sutton said to me, Pastor, you're not going to believe this. He said, Deacon Pedway died. And I'm like, what? And then he called me back and he said, you are not going to believe this. Deacon Cleve Peck died. And then he called me back And he said, Pastor, you're just not going to believe this. Another member died. Yeah, it was all on the same day. I mean, it was just happening every day. And we were on our way to the cemetery uh, in February of that year, someone else. And Reverend Sutton looked to me and he said, man, we need to go get some help. He said, all of these deaths are really sort of impacting me. And I said, you know what, Dave, Reverend Sutton, it's impacting me too. We should get some help. And we discovered that our denomination, provided spiritual direction and all of that. And I ended up going to Midwest Ministries and spending a couple of days. We kind of spent some days talking to therapists. And we really, it's funny when you're in it, you just don't know how traumatized you are until somebody, sits and helps you process it. And it's at that point that I started that journey of really self care so that I wouldn't become a statistic in that manner. So, now I started going to the gym and started, making sure I work on my health and my diet, my mental health. It was at that point that I started taking my month of August off. I started, before I didn't even take vacation. It's like, okay, stuff has to be done. And I realized that the church is like Las Vegas. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are no mirrors. I mean, there's no clocks and no windows. It's just, it really is hard. And so it's been those kinds of tools that have helped me overcome that now. And I had to realize that what keeps the fire burning is space between the logs. And so I needed some space between the logs. Other than that, I was going to burn out. And so that's what has helped me overcome. Like right now, I've learned to say no. I've realized that I can do anything, but I can't do everything. So I have learned to say, hey, I can't do it. I've learned to delegate. I've learned, to really have boundaries in that. I get up every morning. I do the early morning prayer. And the first thing I do is I go to the gym. And I try to keep the gym as a point for my inspiration and for my education and all of that. And I just really a couple of years ago discovered audiobooks. And so I have caught up on a lot of my reading because of the audiobook club that I'm a part of. So it's helped me a lot to take the edge off of my life and the edge off of me and the edge off of the ministry.
Ted, same question to you.
A story of overcoming. Yeah. So, wow. I will say, and I'll follow Pastor Griffin's example on this because growing up, I don't have. We all go through adversity, but my parents worked very hard to shelter and protect us, and I think it's funny because we don't often hear of that Black family story enough. We only hear of the Black family story that the adversity was heavy, but I don't I mean I honestly can say that they worked heavily. If they were struggling, I didn't know, right? Because they made sure that we did. Probably the biggest adversity that I'm going through is probably even currently. I just lost my mom 3 months ago now, and it was unexpected and it was sudden, and I had just talked to her a couple hours before that. And so when I look at that, I recognize, to his point, and I honestly just want to echo a lot of what my brother just said here. It was excellent, but the idea of self care, the idea of space between the logs, the idea of taking time to reflect, and I picked up bike riding during the pandemic, and it is such an exhilarating and refreshing just period for me. And I disappear for an hour that I'm on that bike, and I have headphones on, and I am gone. And I come back. And when I come back, I'm ready and packed. My wife is so funny now. Now she'll say to me, "Did you ride your bike this week at all? You need to go ride your bike because you're a little tense. And you go ride your bike and then you can come talk to me, okay?" And I say, it's like, okay, let me go. So those things are so important for us because as we give and as we pour out, we have to pour back. And our communities have so many needs, and it's so many of us are leading, and so many of us need to be leading. But we have to take that time, and I finding that, and it's helped me. Even I rode my bike the 2 days after my mother passed, and I felt like she was with me. She was, and it really helped a lot. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important.
No, thank you so very much for that, Ted. Dr. Humphries, you want to say?
I think self care. I mean, that in and of itself. But I think the other big piece, because I don't want to repeat, is acknowledging when something challenging is happening, that it is okay to feel like I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to acknowledge I'm hurt, I'm angry. And then now, how do I deal with it? Right. And so, having a therapist or a counselor, it's not a bad word. It's a wonderful thing to be able to be in a space with someone who that is their, passion, but also their expertise to help you process those feelings, and then finding things that um, allow you to express yourself or to have some joy, whether it's bike riding or going to the gym, and making a commitment to yourself, I think is really important because I think some of these things we kind of do, but we don't commit. So like Pastor Griff said, first thing in the morning after his prayer, he goes to the gym. First thing in the morning, I get up and I work out, right? Because I want to make sure I get it in. Because as the day goes on, things get in your way, or committing to whatever time of the day it is you're going to do something, and then letting your family know that so they can support you, right? As opposed to derailing you. And you will have some people derail. Well, do you really need to go bike riding again, right? And then you can say, well, when I go bike riding, we have a much better evening. And then they're gonna be like, see you later, right? And sometimes you have to show how other people benefit from you taking care of yourself, and you can't help anybody else if you're not helping yourself.
And I've had a few different hurdles. Some of them, like my sister passing in 2006, was huge for me. And, I tell people the story sometimes of that moment. We were headed out to go bowling. And at the time, I was a real estate agent. So I was gathering my files with me to take with me. And she took them out of my hand and she put them down. She said, "No, live." And my sister was a social worker. So she too was a therapist. She was my therapist. But she took them out of my hand. She put them down. She said, "No, leave them here. Go live." We went out. My sister was a hermit. We went out and as a family, and she never stayed out beyond dusk. And she was out with us and she bowled. We went to eat and we videotaped everything and we had our laughter. And that Wednesday she was taken. And what that taught me was live, freaking live, right? The work can wait. And my husband would probably say different because I'm always working, because I'm always tending to clients, but I have made my office extremely comfortable for me. I have a bird sanctuary in the backyard that I watch because they remind me, don't worry about tomorrow because we're not there yet. And you can't worry about yesterday because it's already gone. And we're focused on eating right now and get what we need right now. So I do a few different small things, and one thing that I prayed about when I was starting the practice was to have people around me that God knew that would support me. And when I say He did that without me even realizing it was happening, and I just looked up and I had a tribe around me that has poured into me, and I've been able to pour into them. Um, Part of my logo is a butterfly. My sister and I talked about butterflies, and that's part of what that is. And I prayed for it, and I got it.
No,
Yeah.
thank you so very much for that, Melanie. This has been absolutely amazing. TJ, can you make sure we're ready for that outro? This has been absolutely amazing. I really want to thank each and every one of our panelists for being here with us on today. Thank you so very much, Dr. Humphries. Thank you so very much, Dr. Williams. Thank you so very much, Dr. Hall. Thank you so very much, Pastor Griffin. This has been amazing. I want to say to all of my Oakdale family This is just the beginning of a new initiative that we're launching to save our families. There is so much that is going on in our communities. There is so much that is happening. And so, if you want to be a part in any way, shape, or form in this Save the Family initiative, I'm going to encourage you to call the church office at 773-779-9440. That's 773-779-9440. We have a great deal of family programming that we're going to be rolling out in September to begin to give you the tools to address many of the issues that you heard mentioned on tonight. You may not necessarily be a part of the Oakdale community. I also encourage you, if you want to get in on this particular campaign, because it's going to take all of us collectively working together. And when you call the church office, just leave your name, your telephone number, your email address, and someone will follow up with you. If you want to just be in prayer for us, I'm going to ask that you also leave your information as well, because it's going to take all of us collectively working together if we're going to see the changes that we want to see take place in our community. And so before I pass it to Pastor Griffin to close us out in prayer, here at Oakdale, we believe in supporting our young people. I'm grateful for Pastor Griffin for being the type of pastor that really drills that in us to make sure that we give youth and young adults an opportunity. And that just didn't start with Pastor Griffin, but those of us who've been a part of Oakdale for some time know that it started with Pastor Jemison. So you're not in the sanctuary, so you don't see this, but our actual youth AV team has been running the cameras today, dealing with the sound today. So we want to send a big shout out to our youth AV team for doing all of the things that they're doing behind the scenes. And then you also don't know that at the intro, some of you who've seen our broadcast, you know that we had a different intro for our forum today. That intro was prepared by none other than our own beloved CJ Cavell. Cavell, if you could come up so that people can just see your face. I know you like staying behind the camera, but if you could just come into one of these camera shots and just wave your hand so that the people can see you. He has his own kind of media production and piece that he's building out. So he put together the intro for our forum tonight, doing an outstanding job. I think you're getting ready to be a rising senior. Is that right? So he's getting ready to be a rising senior. So we have so many things that are taking place here at Oakdale. And so I want to just give a major shout out to our young people. Thank you, CJ. And don't forget, like I said, if you want to be a part of this initiative, call the church office. We're going to be doing everything we can to save the family as for the balance of this year, as we get ready to really see what we can do to address the violence and inequity that is impacting so many families of color. So thank you for today, and I'm going to kick it to Pastor Griffin.
Thank you so much to the panelists and to Reverend Davenport for putting this together for us. We're really serious about saving our families. So thank you for kicking off this initiative. And we're going to pour more resources and attention to this as well. Father, we thank you so much for this day. And I thank you for each of our panelists. Bless us individually and collectively. Lord, you have given us an assignment, a calling, that we would go and save our families, that we would take our gifts and take our resources and our skills and our talents and help to educate, empower, and transform our families. Oh Lord, we're in the series of the prayer Jabez, and we ask that you would bless us indeed and help us to be a blessing to others. Lord, I ask that you would enlarge our territory and help us to enlarge the territories of others. Lord, you would keep your hand upon us, and Lord, help us to touch others. And Lord, if you would keep us from evil so that we may not cause pain. And Lord, help us to protect others from danger and harm. And then, Lord, I ask that you would dismiss us from this place, but never from your presence. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. God bless you and go in peace.
Beloved, I came to tell somebody that it's going to be all right. This is the year of 2020. This is the year of clarity. This is the year for God to do things like never before. It's going to be all right. I came to remind somebody, touch your neighbor, tell them it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. I feel it in my spirit that it's going to be all right.
need somebody to put their hands together.
Hey, it's gonna be alright. Do you believe it? Alright. Do you receive it? It's gonna be alright. Alright. Put your hands together if you know it's gonna be. Jesus told me, I believe it, cause he said it, it will be, it gotta be, it will be, alright. Alright, do you receive it? Alright, it's gonna be, it's gonna be, it's gonna be alright. I'm not worried, don't you cry, don't worry, don't you cry. So it can be, Jesus came, so it can be. Tell you a neighbor, tell somebody, anybody, everybody, it's gonna be alright. Don't you worry, it's gonna be alright. Don't you worry, it's gonna be alright. Alright, alright. Everybody just clap you. Alright, alright. Y'all ain't clapping like you believe it. I believe God. I receive God. I stand on it. I hold to it. I won't let go. I won't give up. I believe it. I can name it. I can claim it. I stand on it. I don't doubt it. And I trust him. Alright. 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 It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. I hear the Bible says the Lord himself will go before you. If you believe it, he'll open up the door, he'll make the way. Don't you worry, it's gonna be alright. Don't you fret, it's gonna be alright. Put your hands together, alright. Hey, alright.
Come on, let's bless Jesus. Hallelujah. Now don't fool me.